waiting for our authorization. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Ariane Young, a community advocate who graciously stepped up when Armando Truel had to step down. Ariane Young is a former civil rights attorney who has worked with national advocacy organizations, speaking to audiences around the country and before the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Ariane Young.
Thank you, Betsy. Candidates, welcome. I met many of you backstage, so welcome again. And to everyone who's joined us here today, thank you very much for being here. Let me begin by explaining the format of the forum, which the candidates were apprised ahead of time. So candidates, you will have 1 minute for an opening statement. Then I will ask a handful of questions. You will have 2 minutes to answer each question. If time permits at the end, we will have lightning round or rounds. Then you will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. There are 2 timekeepers who are seated in the front row. Timekeepers, raise your hand. Okay, there they are. When there's a minute left on your speaking time, you'll see a yellow card that reads 1 minute as such. At 15 seconds, you'll see the orange card. And when time is up, you'll see the red stops. Oh, pink stopping card. At that moment, please stop. And if you continue to speak beyond your time, I will say thank you. And we'll move on to the next speaker. So please note that there are cameras at the back of the auditorium, and this forum is being live streamed over the United for Maryland Facebook page, where a recording will be made and left for you all to watch at a later time. So I have some instructions for our friends in the audience. Please turn off your cell phones and any beeping watches. And if you need to speak, please take that conversation outside. We request that you treat all the candidates respectfully, and that means no clapping, cheering, calling out, waving signs. We appreciate your exuberance, but we want to keep that to a minimum. Except that after the closing statements, you may clap for all of the candidates. So let's turn now to the questions and a word about those questions. So United for Maryland solicited questions from its co-sponsoring organizations in advance. And to ensure an array of topics would be covered, United for Maryland has combined, summarized, or rewritten those questions. But the questions that you're being asked today originate from those submissions received. No questions will be taken from the floor today. However, after the forum, please meet with our candidates at the meet and greet. And also, you may submit a question on an index card for consideration for one of the future candidate forums that United for Maryland is sponsoring. Index cards in the submission box are available at the table with the t-shirts outside of the auditorium. So the candidates have been informed of the following format. Each candidate will receive the same number of questions. However, to give the audience an opportunity to hear from a wide array of topics, 2 to 3 candidates at a time will receive the same question. If any candidate wants to respond to a question that has not been asked of you, you've been invited to submit a response, and your response will be posted on the United for Maryland website. That is United for Maryland, all one word, spelled out, .org. In total, we'll cover about 10 to 12 questions. So in summary, candidates, you'll have an opportunity to make an opening statement, 1 minute. Then groupings of the 2 to 3 of you will receive the answer questions, 2 minutes to respond. If and only if time permits at the end, all candidates will be asked the same lightning round questions, and all candidates will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. candidates to make their opening statements. Starting with Alec Ross, you have 1 minute.
Good afternoon, United for Maryland, and thank you for having me. My name is Alec Ross, and I am running for governor because I believe that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. I grew up in coal country and then taught public school at Booker T. Washington Middle School in Baltimore. From there, I spent 12 years helping lead nonprofit organizations. I ran technology policy for Barack Obama's first presidential campaign, and I served in his administration managing very large programs designed to bring innovative solutions to some of America's most challenging national security problems. I'm running a different kind of campaign because I think that's what it's going to take to win. It's a campaign rooted in new ideas because I think the same old is just not going to cut it anymore. Talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. It's time we widen the doors of opportunity for everyone, and I look forward to discussing those ideas with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Hello? I'm here. Hello! First of all, thank you for having me this afternoon. As I traveled around the state, I could feel the quiet anxiety of Marylanders, hardworking Marylanders. You know, if you think about your personal challenges and the challenges we face as a state, you have to ask yourself the question, has the governor punted on those issues or confronted them? I look forward to talking about the experience and perspective I bring to the governor's office. Like many Marylanders, I grew up in a military family. We moved around a lot. In school, I had trouble reading. I got into fights and I got held back. But because I had loving parents and great teachers, I became the first in my family to graduate from college. That is something that I take very personal. In every job that I've held, whether it's county executive, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Madaleno.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out today, and thank you to United for Maryland for doing this. For the last 15 years, I've been leading the state on some of the most important, successful, progressive battles in our country. Together, we have eliminated the death penalty, we have reduced gun violence, we have passed the DREAM Act, and we have provided the freedom to marry to couples like Mark and myself. I'm very proud of my leadership and of our state for getting all of these things done. You know, to paraphrase the musical Hamilton, I haven't just been in the room where it happens, I've often been the person making it happen. But over the last several years, we have lost our momentum, and we have to get it back. Maryland can be the beacon it once was for progressive change in this country. Under my leadership, we will. That's why I'm the Democrat who will beat Larry Hogan next November. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jealous.
Thank you, it's good to be here. My name is Ben Jealous. I'm the former national president of the NAACP. These days I'm a partner at Cape Port Capital, where we invest in companies that make the world better for working people, like Pigeon Week, co-founded by a Morgan State grad. It's cut the cost of calling home from federal prison by more than 80%. I'm proud to be endorsed by Bernie Sanders, by the Working Families Party, by Friends of the Earth, by Bill McKibben, and by DFA and several other groups. And I'm proud to have been named Marylander of the Year in 2013 by the Baltimore Sun for my role in helping to lead the battles to abolish the death penalty, pass the DREAM Act, and pass marriage equality. We won all those battles the way that we will win this race. We built a bigger coalition of Marylanders than anybody thought was possible. That's how we'll get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kavanaugh?
Thank you all for being here. I'm running for governor because I think of what Marylanders care about when they wake up every morning. Is my family healthy? Can I provide for them? Are my kids safe? Can they succeed in life? I look at our governor and I see someone who's trying to gut education, who's watching as the crime rate goes up, or as the opioid crisis gets worse every day. Someone who doesn't care about whether I have affordable health care. Someone who really doesn't care about the middle class because he's against paid sick leave. He's against a $15 minimum wage. On top of that, Donald Trump is out of control, and Larry Hogan's letting him get away with it. I offer Marylanders decades of experience, someone who knows how to roll up his sleeves, do the hard work to get real results. That's my track record, and that's what I'll do as governor.
Thank you. Ms. Vignaraja?
Good afternoon. My name is Krish Vignaraja. A few weeks ago, I launched my campaign outside of the basement apartment that I grew up in Edmondson Heights. So I wanted to spend a minute telling you a little bit about my background. When I was 9 months, my parents fled a civil war in Sri Lanka with no money and $200 in their pockets. Well, sorry, $200 in the pockets with no jobs. They moved to Maryland and they became Baltimore City public school teachers. And it was there that they built a life that made my life, going from Woodlawn to the White House, possible. I realized that we had unique opportunities. Before anything else, I was an immigrant, and I was the proud daughter of 2 public school teachers. And so as a result, I spent my entire career trying to make up for that blessing. I worked hard and went from Edmondson Heights to the Ivy League. I worked through Yale and got student loans. I then went to Oxford and then went to Yale Law School. And I returned to serve as senior advisor to Secretary Clinton and First Lady Michelle Obama's policy director. My newborn daughter's life would be easier because my own parents' lives were hard. And to me, that is the American dream. That's what I'm fighting for, and that's why I'm running for governor.
Thank you, candidates. At this moment, we're going to take a moment break just to allow some latecomers to enter the auditorium. And I've been told that they're all here. Everyone's prompt. I like that. Okay. A comment. Jim Shea is a candidate who planned to be here, very much wanted to be here, but wasn't able to, so he sends his regrets. Also, Rockmore Cummings and Ralph Jaffe were extended invitations, but were unable to participate. Now moving on to the questions. We will begin with one question for each of our candidates that is tailored to your background. You will have 2 minutes to answer. This is a question for Alec Ross. Can you tell us specifically about a single project that you worked on with the White House or the State Department?
Sure. Where to start? So I'll tell the story of the hours after the earthquake in Haiti. When the earthquake in Haiti took place, as you all may remember, in January of 2010, we very quickly determined that a couple 100,000 people were going to die, and that the level of devastation was going to be extraordinary. The earthquake took place around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we quickly got a call from Hillary Clinton. She was on a plane in Hawaii trying to make a connection to Papua New Guinea, a flight she didn't get to take. And she reached us and she said, Alec, by the time people have the first cup of coffee in their hand tomorrow morning and are hearing about this tragedy, I want you to have something in place so that the American people can get involved in the response. My staff was all over the world, went back to my office, and there were 3 young women there, Kate, Katie, and Katie. So me, Kate, Katie, and Katie said, all right, we've got until tomorrow morning to come up with a project to get all of the American people involved in helping in Haiti. And one of the Katies said, hey, Alec, what about this technology we helped develop where you can actually make a donation over your cell phone? And we said, hey, this is a pretty clever idea. So I reserved a short code, 90999. We made the Red Cross the designee. And we thought we were pretty clever. We thought we would raise a couple $100,000. You know, hey, text the word Haiti to the short code. $10 will get added to your cell phone bill, and all of it will go to the earthquake relief. In 3 weeks, we raised $40 million. Total cost to the taxpayers, 0. Total cost to me, the $19 I put on my credit card for that short code. Innovation in government. It can be done.
Thank you. This question is for Sharon Baker. As the county executive, Prince George's County, you oversaw ethics and oversights reform. of the county government, if you were elected governor, how would you address special interests and corruption in Annapolis?
I think the same way that we did it in Prince George's County. The first thing I did as county executive, because we had been rocked by the largest ethical scandal in the state of Maryland outside of what happened in the 70s with Margaret McDowell. But when I came in, most candidates in Prince George's County, as they do throughout the state, get their money from developers. And so what I propose at the state level is to go and take that ability away, not only from the county council members, but for the county executive. Now, a lot of people on my staff are not very happy since I had just become county executive and needed to raise money. But the signal I wanted to send was that we were serious about ethics in Prince George's County, and we were serious about getting things right. That is the same way we have to do it at the state level. I think there are two things that are critical. One, as much as possible to make sure that we get money out of politics. The other thing is to pass a bill so that we can actually have campaign contributions coming, funded from the citizens. If we do that, and we give everyone a fair shot, I'm sure everyone on this panel would agree, the last thing you want to do is sit on the phone raising money. So we want to make sure that we can have public funding for finance of campaigns, but also make sure that we have strong ethical laws, and then when there are complaints, we follow them through. That's what we've done in Prince George's County, and that's what we'll do at the state level.
Thank you, Mr. Madalena. Of all the bills that did not pass in Annapolis last year, which one do you think should have passed? And if elected governor, how will you help to get it passed?
Thank you for the question. I think the bill that personally I was most disappointed in it not passing was the Maryland Trust Act. We had an opportunity to send a very powerful statement to the residents of our state that we were not going to tolerate the actions of the Trump administration. We were not going to let our local public safety agencies be nationalized and forced to go out and actually do immigration services, go out and round up people. It was causing fear, distress in our communities. It was creating conflict between the police and the communities that they are tasked to protect. It was, quite frankly, unconstitutional to ask our local jails to hold people without cause, without a warrant. We would not tolerate any American being held in those conditions. And for us to turn around and say, well, our rules don't apply when someone is not clearly a documented resident of the country, is to cast aside, I think, our principles. So we should have passed the Trust Act. We could have sent a very strong message to people in our community who have called Maryland home, some of them for decades, and said, no, we are not going to let fear and this effort by the Trump administration to infect our state. So personally, there were so many bills. There were a lot of nonviolence prevention bills that I would love to have seen that happen. But I think the Trust Act was one where I was most disappointed, and most disappointed in our party that we were unable to get enough Democrats together to get that done.
Thank you. This question is for Mr. Jealous. To date, you have not held elected office, which portends new approaches to governance. If you were to become governor, what changes would you make to get things accomplished?
It's true, I'm not a politician. I'm not running because I need a job. I'm running because I have a vision that we can move forward more quickly in the areas of education and protecting the environment and public safety and health than we are right now. As an investor in tech companies, you look at other people's failure differently. Some say, well, because California tried to pass a Medicare for All bill and failed, and New York failed, and Vermont failed, well, we just can't do it. Well, I look at it the way that the man who invented the light bulb looked at every failure before. Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times before he finally succeeded. Changed the entire world. And here in Maryland, we have families, we have 80-year-old women who are going out having to work because they can't afford to pay their pharmaceutical bills. We have families whose budgets are being squeezed again and again as healthcare costs surge. And we have friends who are dying untimely deaths, top 5 cause of untimely death in our state. We can, and we will, when I'm governor, pass Medicare for all in the state, no matter what happens in Washington. We're able to do it because, frankly, we're a little further down the road than most states. But we'll get it done the way that we got the DREAM Act done, the way that we got the death penalty done, the way that we abolished, the way that we passed marriage equality. You know, folks had tried many years before in the state. But then we came together and we built a movement in a historical moment in which it was more possible. And it's that combination of a governor who has will, the way that Martin O'Malley had will on those 3 issues, building a movement, and this moment that makes it possible for us to pass health care for all.
Thank you. This question is for Kevin Kamenetz. As a county executive of Baltimore County, you have advocated for the interests of the county, which often ran against the interests of Baltimore City. If you are elected governor, how will you balance these competing interests?
Well, I think we need a governor who understands all parts of the state. I'm a lifelong Marylander. I'm a lifelong Democrat. Baltimore County is a separate jurisdiction from Baltimore City, but we surround the city almost like a horseshoe. 90% of the Baltimore Beltway is actually in Baltimore County, but there's a symbiotic relationship between the city and the county because we have common interests. Many of us came from Baltimore City. Our cultural institutions are regional in nature, but located in the city, and the same with our sporting institutions. And we have shared goals and visions. I was certainly disappointed with what took place with the unrest, but it wasn't just about Freddie Gray. It wasn't just about the poor relationship between the police and the community. It was also about the cycle and generations of poverty existing within the exact same census tracts. What we need is the opportunities to help people by giving them affordable housing in decent neighborhoods with low crime, by promoting opportunities for education and workforce development, and by having a viable transportation network that allows people to get to work. Now, my record in Baltimore County is that we've improved our schools with record investment in school construction. We've got a graduation rate with no disparity between black and white students in Baltimore County. We've cut our job rates in half and have built one of the largest intermodal industrial redevelopments in the country at Bethlehem Steel that's going to create 15,000 jobs. We've protected our environment, and I've done it all without ever raising the tax rates. That's the kind of leadership I'll bring not only to Baltimore City, but the entire state. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is for Chris Figueroa. Can you tell us specifically about a single project that you've worked on with Michelle Obama?
Sure, I would speak to Let Girls Learn. I'm not sure how many folks in the audience know what that is, but it's an initiative that the President and First Lady launched as I was her policy director. It's an initiative that we led because we realized that making sure that adolescent girls stay in middle school and high school is of critical importance, not just to those girls and their families, but frankly to communities and countries around the world, but also here at home. It was an initiative that I think probably reflects the way in which I would govern, because it had to be a little scrappy. My boss wasn't a U.S. government employee. We had no real budget authority. We didn't, automatically oversee agencies. But obviously what we tried to do was, through the power of persuasion, get folks, private partners on board. And so it had 3 key components. One was the fact that we were able to bring together 7 agencies across the entire U.S. government in order to support the initiative, from the State Department to USDA to the Peace Corps. And it was important because we realized that government has to approach problems like girls' education in a more holistic way. Instead of stovepiping them between different agencies, what we brought together was an interagency effort in order to realize that if we actually worked together, the sum of parts would in fact be greater. The second part of it was bringing public-private partnerships together. And so through Let Girls Learn, we launched 100 different partnerships. The initiative itself was $1 billion initiative in terms of U.S. government funding, but through my leadership, we were actually able to, through those 100 partners, bring over $3 billion of additional private funding to the cause. So in essence, it was a $4 billion initiative. And that was important because each of these entities brought very unique opportunities and assets to the table. And then the third piece was about public messaging, making sure that folks were aware of the issue, making sure that there was buy-in from audiences across the country, and that's where I would also bring in voters.
Thank you. Our questions now will be for 2 or 3 of you to answer. Please limit your response to 2 minutes. This question is for Rich Madaleno and Alec Ross. Maryland is a state with a growing and diverse population. In your view, what has the state done and can do to support immigrant integration in the workplace, schools, and the community? Mr. Madaleno, please start off.
Well, first, with our schools, it's very important that we continue to provide the services that the families, that immigrant families need, that the children need. That means providing, in some cases, English language services and English language training for not just the children, but for their family members, and doing it in a way that is accessible for the family members. Sometimes it also means providing other social services within the school setting, school-based health centers, a variety of counseling services, things that allow participation and inclusion within the greater society on an easier basis. When it comes to, in other ways, helping immigrant families fit in with or feel comfortable and safe in our communities, I already touched upon the Trust Act in my initial response, and I think it's important to remind people that Larry Hogan is actually out fundraising on the Trust Act. He is actually out there using immigrants as a scapegoat to fundraise and scare Marylanders. And I think you're not going to see that from me. You're not going to see that from anyone up here, that we're going to go out and try to scapegoat some part of our community. I think we have to continue to focus on making sure, just like any other working family in the state, we have adequate public transportation so that people can get to the jobs that are necessary. I think we have to make sure that we have good job training that's accessible to everybody, whether it's through the community colleges or helping businesses. But I think it's important that everyone have access to job training. And I think, considering we have so many people in our community as immigrants who are actually ready to nationalize and have not, because the cost of naturalization can be so expensive, we should be more aggressive, like some other communities are, in helping families pay for their naturalization.
Mr. Ross, same question, 2 minutes.
So this has been a big week for me on this issue. I've been a target of Blue Lives Matter and Veterans for Trump, because at the beginning of this week, I made a strong statement that it is time for us to stop the overreach by ICE. I think that what is happening right now in Maryland, where there is evidence of warrantless entry into premises, where there is evidence of interrogation of people where the probable cause is they speak Spanish, that's wrong. And so the first thing that I think we need to have is we need to have a governor who is committed to protect our citizens, our green card holders, and our guests. On this issue, when I'm governor and you drive into Maryland and you drive under a sign that says, "Welcome to Maryland," you're entering the resistance. I think it is awful, the rhetoric that has infected American politics, where we are taking everybody who is not of American origin and suddenly they are treated with hostility. It is incredibly disappointing, and this is a case where our governor needs to be very, very, very strong. Now, as a practical matter, how do we integrate them into our workplace, community, and schools? Let me focus on schools. I'm running as the education governor. I was a public school teacher. My wife is a public school teacher. My kids are in public schools. I think we have a great opportunity with the Kirwan Commission to account for the fact that a growing percentage of our public school students were not born in America, and there are things that we can do for those students and for those families to help integrate them into the community, whether it's English as a second language classes, community school programs that respond to the need of immigrants. But first and foremost, we need a strong governor who will not let this form of Trumpism infect Maryland.
Thank you. This question is for Krish Vignaraja and Kevin Kapanitz. With Western Maryland seeing a decline in coal mining and other fossil fuel industries, what economic development do you see as viable for those areas?
So this is where I think that the governor needs to show true leadership, because the reality is that Maryland is a state that has incredible assets, ranging from the incredible, beautiful resources in Western Maryland to the Eastern Shore, but also the incredible human talent as well as our location. And so what I would propose are a few different things. First and foremost, when you see declining manufacturing in Hagerstown, the question is, in parts of Hagerstown, Cumberland, etc., what opportunities are there? We see that there are companies like CSX there. But the fact that we're now having conversations where, frankly, the governor hasn't been playing an active role in terms of showing leadership to guarantee that CSX, in fact, does stay here, reflects the fact that we have a lack of leadership from Annapolis. Because whether it's CSX, whether it's financial services that have started to grow in those areas, you realize that there's an incredible opportunity that we could build on, but we're not. When I kicked off my campaign, I actually was in Garrett County. We did a beautiful hike of Swallow Falls, and then the next morning, I attended the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce. And you realize that, those were two examples of things that we should be promoting. We should be promoting access to our outdoor resources, because we should have an economy that competes against any other state in the country, east of the Mississippi particularly, when it comes to hunting, fishing, birding, biking, because we do have the assets out there. And this is where, when we're talking about banning fracking, we need to make sure that there's a sustainable income that exists for those areas. But there's also other opportunities. When I was there, I learned about the robotics programs. They're incredible. But the truth is that students come out of these programs, and the reality is they don't actually have jobs because we can't find companies to relocate there. And that's where I believe that we will be expanding under my leadership, the biotech corridor, the cyber tech corridor. We should be leading on information technology. We should be making sure that all of those jobs stay in Maryland.
Thank you.
Because we have the assets.
Mr. Kapanitz, same question.
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing up Western Maryland, because in order for us to win this race next year, we have to fight for Democratic votes in all parts of the state, including Western Maryland. And it's really interesting. Western Maryland, I don't really know what Larry Hogan's done for them. The opioid and crime epidemic is rising in Western Maryland. The jobs are down. Really, their future isn't any brighter. Let me tell you what I've done in Baltimore County. I faced a situation where I saw the demise of steelmaking. More than a century of steelmaking came to a close at Bethlehem Steel. And a lot of people said, oh, we'll bring steel back. I looked those steel workers in the eyes and I said, steel is not coming back, but let's work together to create that next generation of jobs. And now, on the Sparrows Point Peninsula, we have the largest intermodal industrial redevelopment in the country. We lost 2,000 jobs with RG Steel. We're now creating 17,000 jobs with the likes of Under Armour and FedEx and Pasha Automotive, which does roll on, roll off. These are the type of opportunities that we can develop statewide by determining what value do we have in the location and how do we capitalize on it. But we also have to focus on education. In Baltimore County, I merged the Office of Workforce Development into our Department of Economic Development. We're focused, as opposed to paying corporate ransom to some company to locate in Maryland, we're focused on servicing our existing large employers, understanding what their workforce needs are, and then we train these people to graduate with a job in their hand. That's how you get new opportunities for people, and that's what we can do in Western Maryland and all over the state. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is for Sharon Baker and Alec Ross. Turning to the other part of the state. The Eastern Shore of Maryland is economically depressed relative to the Baltimore-Washington corridor. If you are elected governor, what types of economic development would you promote on the Eastern Shore? Mr. Bigg.
Thank you. One of the, being County Executive of Prince George's County is 500 square miles for urban, suburban, and rural. So in order to create job opportunities in Prince George's County, we had to look at every part of it. And so the Eastern Shore is not much different in terms of the issues we face in the southern part of Prince George's County. When I was out there on the Eastern Shore, it's a beautiful place. People want to stay in their homes there, but they want to be able to have the job opportunities that are necessary. And so we started looking at what are the job creations in the county that we could do, that you could provide anywhere, whether it's the Eastern Shore or Western Maryland. And so we looked at an organization like 2U, which is a online education opportunity that can be located anywhere. And we incentivize that location in New Carrollton and Prince George's County. But that's the type of job opportunities you can put in the Eastern Shore. You can also do incentives around what is naturally there. You're off the water. So the environment is going to provide a lot of opportunities for us to create the green economy and green jobs. I would focus on those. And finally, I think everyone will say this, and that is we have to make sure that we have a quality education system that is preparing our students and our workforce to go to college, but also to be workforce ready. And so I think diversifying is the way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Ross, any question?
So the two biggest deficits on the Eastern Shore that I think are addressable and are addressable by the governor. One, broadband, and number two, the skilled trades. Folks on the Eastern Shore, they do want access to high-speed, low-cost broadband. And land was the raw material of the agricultural age. Iron was the raw material of the industrial age. Data is the raw material of the information age. It doesn't matter if you're selling hand-carved wooden ducks. You still have to have a broadband connection to be able to reach markets. The connectivity on the Eastern Shore is horrendous. And what I would focus on as governor, and I did this over the course of 14 years of my life, helping to bring high-speed, low-cost broadband into underserved communities. I would focus on lighting up the Eastern Shore with high-speed, low-cost connectivity to help enable people to do the kind of work that they want to do there without moving. The second thing is the skilled trades. I think, and this is an area where I fault Democrats. For the last 20 or 30 years, our rhetoric has been, you go to college and you're a winner, you don't go to college and you're a loser. And you want to know why some people are voting for Trump who aren't college educated? It's because of that rhetoric and that reality. There are a lot of folks on the Eastern Shore who are choosing to not go to college. So what we really should be focusing on are the skilled trades and the apprenticeships where there is a lot of demand and insufficient supply. We need welders, we need electricians, we need plumbers, we need them on the Eastern Shore. They need the programs that a governor in the state can bring.
Thank you. The next question is for Kevin Kamenetz and Ben Jealous. What do you see as the single most impactful action that will increase diversity in Maryland? Mr. Kamenetz.
Diversity in what?
Diversity in Maryland politics, excuse me. I'll read the question again. What do you see as the single most impactful action that will increase diversity in Maryland politics?
The most important thing we can do in this state is to focus on education, because that's the path that leads to opportunities for everyone. In Baltimore County, we've worked hard to make sure that we reach those opportunities in a very diverse school system. Baltimore County's public school system is a very similar population to Montgomery County. It's majority minority. We actually have students from 105 different countries. 5% of our students don't even speak a word of English, and they speak Swahili and Farsi. We have 40% of our children in Baltimore County who report as free and reduced meal eligible. So our goal is how do we reach all of these people and provide them the opportunities to succeed, and we've been doing that. We also have to promote good opportunities for people to do business with the government And in Baltimore County, we have promoted aggressive women-owned and minority-owned business enterprise opportunities. We set goals at 15%, and we've been achieving 17 to 19% success rate, and we want those opportunities. We've also worked hard to diversify our county government. When I took office, I made it a goal to make sure that our police and fire departments reflected the quality and the diversity of the communities that we represent. And our recruit classes have been 40% non-white male every year. And we're showing great results with improving the relationship with body cameras, and we're leaders on that, and crime is down in Baltimore County. So there's so many different ways that we can set by example opportunities for all. That's what we're missing now as President Trump conducts his reign of terror on the immigrant community. And it's why I passed an executive order to stand up for that, for those rights.
Thank you, Mr. Jealous.
The question was diversity in Maryland politics, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
What do
I just
you
want to make
see?
sure that I heard you correctly. The best thing we can do to increase diversity in politics in our state is to actually have public financing across the state that works. I push hard for it in counties like Howard County, and we need a system that works statewide. It should not be that wealth is the first primary, that there's a financial barrier to the participation of our neighbors. I got a little bit more time left, so let's talk about the pipeline into that. The reality is that wealth is a barrier to education as well, and we have to end that. If you go back the day before mass incarceration began, if you go back to the 1960s, public universities in our country cost about 9 hours of minimum wage work per week to pay your fees. That's why you know so many baby boomers who worked their way through college. And that's why you don't know many Generation Xers or folks from younger generations who didn't come out without debt. And that debt is strangling the future leadership of our country in politics and business. I mentor startups every day, and lots of young people with great ideas, but they feel like they have to just go earn a paycheck and they can't launch that next great business. Similarly, we have to make sure that our vendors are inclusive. If you look at what funds a lot of this kind of career politicians' coffers, it's vendors to government. And the reality is that there's great discrimination in this state against women-owned businesses, against people of color-owned businesses. We've just launched what will become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's not one person of color who owns a majority. Actually, we've done it twice. We did it with gambling, and we've done it with medical cannabis. So we have to do better. We have to create a pipeline, but if it's about diversity in politics, we must pass a public financing system that works.
Thank you. Next question is for Rich Manolino and Ben Jealous. With the purple line, going forward, if you are elected governor, what development projects will you pursue to bring economic development to the eastern end of the purple line?
We have already made great strides in the New Carrollton area with the number of agencies that have been brought in from both the federal government, with the IRS is there. We helped get the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development there. So we've tried to bring a significant amount of business presence to New Carrollton, and now it's trying to bring the residential and retail component that provides for an exciting and innovative community. Moving a little bit further to the west, the area around what many of us who've lived here a long time would refer to as the Capitol Center, that area is being redeveloped with the new Prince George's Hospital through a partnership between the state and the hospital. And I know you have the opportunity to use the hospital as an anchor institution for moving Largo further ahead as far as creating another town center. Of course, many of us in Maryland desperately wanted the new FBI headquarters to be located here. And there were two sites that the state had in Prince George's County, which would have provided a further anchor to development along that corridor, and then certainly in the whole area around the University of Maryland. And in College Park, going down to Hyattsville, you have that whole corridor into Riverdale where you could do so much with additional development. The University of Maryland's, and I'm so proud of my role in advancing the University of Maryland, we have the opportunity truly, I think over the next 20 years, this is the University of Maryland's moment to really hit the top. And with strong leadership in that development, I think you will have that sort of success.
Thank you. Mr. Jealous.
Got a question. How many of you saw the movie Hidden Figures? Hidden Figures. You know, Maryland in many ways is a hidden state. We have the most diverse, by many counts, the most diverse and inclusive STEM industries of any state in the country. We should not just be talking about recruiting the FBI to Prince George's. We should also be talking about recruiting Facebook and Google to Prince George's. The reality is that the big companies in the Silicon Valley are under two types of pressure right now. On one hand, there's a looming million programmer shortage. And so they're starting to build expansion campuses in other places looking to harness talent in this country, even as they make the case to import more from elsewhere. And they're got about the worst inclusion numbers you'll ever see. They've actually gone backwards. This industry going forward has gone backwards. It was 30% women, now it's about 15%. It was 10% black 30 years ago, now it's under 3%. Well, in Maryland, our programmers, computer scientists, computer engineers, are about 20% black. And Prince George's County has 17 times as many as Santa Clara County, the epicenter of the Silicon Valley. So we should be having conversations with the biggest tech companies in the country, not just one that put out an RFP recently, but all of them, about building expansion campuses in Maryland and Prince George's County, in the western end of the red line, the eastern end of the red line is the perfect place. Of the purple line, it's the perfect place. Sorry, it's a Baltimore guy, I'm a little ticked about the red line. Is the perfect place. And we've got to see our inclusion here not as something that we have to comply with, our diversity not as something that we have to comply with, but as our secret sauce, as our special advantage, as the reason why us and no other state.
Thank you. This next question is for Rashern Baker and Chris Vignarajah. What policies do you think are needed to strengthen the safety net for LGBTQ families in Maryland? Mr. Baker.
Thank you. I thought I was going to get the purple line in a minute. No, but I think the way to strengthen the laws is what we've done at the state. I do want to commend Rich and the work that he's done, not just as the state senator, but when he worked up there in the budget office and others. We've been working on this for years, but I think, one, we have to send a clear signal at the governor's office that we will not tolerate any type of discrimination at all. And I think we also have to do that, and I commend Kevin for doing the same thing we did in Prince George's County by sending a strong signal. Those are the things that we could do on a legislative matter. The other way that we could do it is also by making changes in the way we do construction, the way we do buildings around the state and the county. By that I mean bathrooms. A signal to say they're universal bathrooms that are not only helpful for those who are transgender, but also for families. But making signals that we're going to make every part of our great state inclusive. So not just in terms of words, but also in terms of deeds. And so as we look for those opportunities, that's what we need to do.
I think this is a critical question today more than ever, because the truth is, in terms of expecting leadership from the White House and at the federal level, we have seen time and time again that this administration will specifically not just protect these demographics, but frankly attack them. And I think the most recent evidence is the fact that Attorney General Sessions has now indicated that he will actually not enforce discriminatory laws when it comes to transgender. And that's where I think that more than ever today, making sure that we have a democratic governor to stand up and fight back, not just for all Marylanders, but frankly to reflect American values throughout this country, is critical. Because the reality is that when we see this type of targeting, we as a community must band together. And I think there's a few different ways we can do this. First, I think, as Sharon just mentioned, I do think it's incredibly important for us to make sure that through procurement processes, et cetera, that there is preferential treatment that is provided to those groups that are greatest at risk. But I also think that an important part of what we should be doing is making sure that the Fairness for All Marylanders Act is expanded, because right now there are exceptions. And so LGBT discrimination is exempted when it comes to religious institutions, schools, when it comes to insurance. And under my leadership, I would make sure that those areas would be also included. But I also think that what we need to make sure we recognize is that there are many laws on the book that exist, but they're not actually enforced. We have seen this in many different areas, including LGBT, but also when it comes to environmental enforcement, or when it comes to nursing home. You know, some of you may have seen the recent news about how we are now 7th worst in the nation in terms of ensuring that nursing practices end. And this is nursing practices that are discriminatory, that those end. And the reality is that this is the problem we have under Governor Hogan, because he hasn't allocated the resources to the agencies, and he hasn't ensured that the Attorney General has the resources to fight back.
Thank you. Turning to healthcare, this is a question for Ben Jealous, Kevin Cabinets, and Alec Ross. If we are able to move forward with improving the Affordable Care Act and/or some other form of health insurance as a basic right, what improvements do you think are a priority?
If we're able to move forward with the ACA, is that with improving the ACA?
If we're able to move forward with improving the ACA or some other health insurance.
Got it. Really clear. We gotta change the game. Americans are 5% of the world's people. We're 60% of Big Pharma's profits. Our private insurance plans, the overhead is 5 or 6 times as high as it is for public insurance plans. And our businesses are getting strangled. And our families' budgets are being squeezed because they surge. And frankly, a lot of our friends have health care in name only because the deductibles are so high. Premiums are so high. Now, we've got to do something different, and I'd suggest we start by stopping being so different. Every other Western nation provides basic health care for all their folks. And we need to do it here. I spent 6 months last year seeking to move a factory from Edmonton, Canada to South Baltimore on Reedbird Street, Block Public Housing Project, a brownfield. We were going to put a vertical lettuce farming operation there that would have 36 good-paying jobs on day one. The deal fell apart, not because you had to pay for health care here on top of your corporate taxes. It fell apart because the entrepreneur looked into our history and saw that in the last 4 years, healthcare costs have surged 55%, and he predicted that it would happen again, and we found out 2 weeks ago it's happening again, they're going up 33%. So it's not about some type of healthcare coverage. We need Medicare for all. We can do it here in Maryland. Like so many other things they said was impossible and then we made happen. We'll build the movement, we'll get it done, because we will take care of our own here in Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Cabinets.
Thank you. First of all, let me just reiterate, as I think everyone here does, I believe that every American has a basic human right access to affordable health care. Right now, we know that Obamacare was a tremendous step forward in this country. But we have 2 goals that we have to achieve immediately. Number 1 is to protect Obamacare. The Republicans right now and our president are steadfast on a path to decimate Obamacare. And we have to, there's a huge fight taking place, and we have to stop them. We have to protect the existing laws that protect the health insurance rights of 400,000 Marylanders who now have coverage under Obamacare who did not before. We had to protect the rights of 1.5 million Marylanders who are now covered for pre-existing illnesses that were not before Obamacare. We even had to protect the rights of the 41,000 students who are currently being covered under their parents' health care plan as a result of Obamacare. And then, after we protect Obamacare, we have to strengthen Obamacare. And that means to take the steps that are necessary to reduce the costs. It's hard work, it requires rolling up the sleeves, but that's what we have to get done. After that, sure, we can consider other options. And let me tell you about some options. That's why I supported the prescription drug price affordability bill that passed the General Assembly and allows our Attorney General to sue generic drug manufacturers. That's why I think that there are opportunities for incentives in the state of Maryland to create more affordable health care plans.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Until we get to having universal health care in this country, we are not the great country that we oftentimes think we are. It's embarrassing. And Barack Obama did a great deal, I think, to get us started. But this is something that actually creates a body count. And we have to commit to bringing universal health care into Maryland. Single payer means different things to different people, which we can see now with the United States Senate. One senator thinks it means Medicare for all, another means it means Medicaid for all, another thinks it means a public option. What we need is universal health care. And this is something that really hit me and my wife hard earlier this year. Our 10-year-old son, because we live a life of relative privilege, we're able to afford expensive health insurance. And because I married the woman that I did, she took very careful care in choosing our child's pediatrician. Long story short, his doctor found some horrible growths in his neck. He then got a $6,000 genetic test, which our health insurance was able to pay for. The result of that genetic test was scary. He then got surgery at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and he's okay today. If he didn't have a mom and dad who could afford what we pay, which is a lot, our little boy might be dead. Until we fix the problem where mom and dad are relatively well off, you have health care. If they aren't, you might die. We are not the country that we could and should be.
A transit question for 3 candidates, Chris Vignarajah, Alec Ross, and Rashawn Baker. Maryland has already built one toll road in Montgomery County that is underused. In what circumstances do you think that toll roads and public-private partnerships for transportation can be effective?
This is where I think that it's been very interesting to watch Governor Hogan over the last 3 years, because after not doing anything on transit except for naming the ICC after the only other one-term Republican governor, he all of a sudden has come up with this brilliant plan, $9 billion, to solve the problem with Lexus lanes. And this is where I think the issue is what we see. Governor Hogan is proposing an old problem to a long-standing issue. We know that it costs our economy every year over $2 billion because of the traffic and congestion. It costs each of us individually in wages and gas use about $1,500 a year. So this is not just a convenience issue, it is an issue of family importance, and whether you get in time to see your kids before they go to bed, or whether you're stuck in traffic. But it's also an issue of economics. And this is where Governor Hogan, unlike Governor McAuliffe, when he proposed expanding the roads, he didn't even include a transit option. And so for me, it's important to recognize that we need to address the problem in 2017. And what that means is a few things. First, it means actually implementing investments in transit. It's the purple line, it's the red line, it's recognizing that bike lanes should be going along with these, because we need to make sure that we don't only rely on Governor Hogan's idea, which we realize is backwards. We know, study after study has shown us, that after a period when, during construction, traffic is going to be much worse, what will ultimately happen is that it will get better for 2 to 4 years, and then we'll be back to the same old problem. And so for me, it's about looking at advanced technologies. It's about instituting transit so that we can actually make sure we can get to work and we can get home to our families.
Thank you. Mr. Ross?
When I first read the actual details, the little itty-bitty details that were there about this $9 billion road project, I thought to myself, they clearly are not doing drug testing in the office of the governor. It's like, this is a concept in search of an idea, in search of it was like a plan written by the interns that morning. I mean, come on now. I mean, look, I think I'm a young guy. I'm 45 years old. 45, like that's young, right? And in the America that I grew up in, there weren't rich people's lanes and poor people's lanes. What is that? Like, if there's anything that's supposed to be democratic, it's the road. Right? Have we become so out of balance in this country with the relationship between corporation and government and people? Are things so out of whack now that we are now having rich people's roads, middle-class people's roads, poor people's roads? It's bananas, and it's wrong. And so if you want to know what my transportation policies are going to be, take Larry Hogan's policies, flip them, and you've got mine. Look, this is a case where, again, the United States is not advanced as we should be. Advanced economies around the world and in the United States are making a strong commitment to mass transit. And in places where mass transit isn't a solution, like some of the naughty little spots around 270, let's make the fixes. But the idea that we're just going to bring out the good old boys and we're just going to widen $9 billion worth of roads again, it is regressive. And I am a progressive. And that is what I think we need in our transportation policies. And that is why there is a consequence to whether we have a Democrat or a Republican for 4 more years as governor.
Thank you. Mr. Baker?
You know, I don't know how you go after those last 2 comments, especially. and you were really funny.
The governor's office to come.
And it would be funny if it wasn't for the fact that there is a seriousness to it. The governor actually proposed this because 2018 is coming up. And he hasn't done anything about transportation because it's a hard issue to deal with. He didn't go and talk to the local jurisdiction. I don't know if he talked to you, Rich. I don't know if he talked to Ike, but he certainly didn't talk to me about the impact it's going to have on the families and houses in Prince George's County. He didn't talk about the fact that both Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Baltimore City all voted for a gas tax so you wouldn't have to have a toll road on the highways that would pay for the comprehensive transportation issues around the state where you would have a red line in Baltimore City. It would be funny if that wasn't so serious. But this is something he's using to get reelected. And it is up for us, especially if you live in the Washington region, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County, where we paid extra for the Purple Line. You paid $120 million in Montgomery County. We paid $110 million extra for it in Prince George's County. It is insane that you cut the tolls going across the bridge where out-of-staters are coming, and now you're going to make people who live in Maryland pay more just to get to their jobs. It is time for us to stand up. We need a comprehensive transportation policy. That's what I would do as governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Now turning to an environmental question. This question is for Rich Natalino and Kevin Cabinets. One of the main problems for Maryland is that we are downstream from pollutants coming into the bay from Pennsylvania and downwind from air pollution from western states with coal-burning electric plants. Without federal support, how will you be able to negotiate interstate agreements on these issues if you are elected? Mr. Madalena.
Thank you. So, on the issue of the pollution that's coming down the Susquehanna from Pennsylvania, you have to, without the federal government's involvement, it is very, very difficult to get into changing the procedures and the rules in Pennsylvania. That's where we are so fortunate to have an aggressive Attorney General in Brian Frosh, who is actually getting out there and taking on the polluters and taking on the Trump administration for their failure to enforce our laws. And it would be, quite frankly, up to the Attorney General to aggressively go after polluters in Pennsylvania, and I plan to be the governor that Brian Frosh deserves, as far as a partner in actually fighting pollution and fighting the Trump administration. I don't know if people realize that with all of the funds that we stand to lose from the federal government by zeroing out the Chesapeake Bay program, that is all of our enforcement staff. I mean, all of the people who work for the state government who are out there doing enforcement are being funded by the federal government. If we don't stand up aggressively and stop that from being happening, our environmental programs will be decapitated. We're fortunate we've got people like Jamie Raskin, Ben Cardin, Chris Van Hollen, a whole team that is actually fighting very hard to stop it, and I'm confident they will. But we've got a problem with the river. And then when it comes to air quality, our governor has refused to participate in the interstate compact that has been arranged to fight back and enforce the Paris Accords here. He says we have these standards already in Maryland, but we're going to suffer if we can't get West Virginia, Ohio, the states to our west to actually enforce the same standards, because we will never be able to afford to clean our own air to that standard without their help.
Thank you. Mr. Kemnitz?
Thank you. You all may not know this. Baltimore County actually is home to 200 miles of waterfront and 2,000 miles of streams and tributaries. And 2/3 of our county geographically is zoned rural in nature and is on well and septic. So the environment and environmental protection is a big deal in Baltimore County. We've tried to do some innovative things at the local level. I've put solar panels on our closed landfills and other rooftops of other county-owned buildings. Our goal is to try and generate 21 megawatts of power, saving $20 million in avoided costs over the next 25 years for our taxpayers. We actually are the only county in this state to own our own recycling center, and it's so efficient, it's generating $1.5 million a year back to the tax rolls. I think what we're showing is that you can save the environment while also saving taxpayer dollars. What we need to see on a state level is a little better cooperation, and we've seen that in the past when we've entered into cooperative agreements with Virginia regarding management of the crab population. Not as strong as I'd like to see, but there was an effort. But right now, under Mr. Pruitt, Secretary Pruitt, Donald Trump is determined to decimate the EPA. Larry Hogan remains silent while they're rolling back protections on the Chesapeake Bay. It requires, as Senator Madaleno said, an aggressive Attorney General like we have to force the federal government to make sure that the Clean Air Act standards are being upheld by all states. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's now turn to education. This question is for Ben Jealous, Rich Madaleno, and Chris Vignaraja. One problem in Montgomery County and in other areas is the growing disparity in facility quality between newer and older schools. Older schools often lack basic functions like air conditioning. These decisions are controlled by the local school boards. If you are elected governor, how would you address this problem? We start with Mr. Jealous.
Well, you know, I got a vested interest in this. I got 2 kids in the Montgomery County Public Schools. And son's in kindergarten, my daughter's in the system. But you travel across the state and you see the same thing again and again and again. You could be in Prince George's County, you could be in Cumberland. Reality is that we need to be doing a lot better by our kids. And it starts with casino money. And that lottery money. You think we forgot? We have. As governor, I will keep the promise to the people of this state that that money will be used to substantially increase funding for our public schools, not to supplant historic sources, but to supplement. We have to be prepared to provide our kids with a first-class education, not by national standards, but by global standards. And the reality is we used to lead the country, we've fallen 5 places. But if you look at our country, compared to the rest of the world, we're the 29th by many measures of the top 30 economies, or 28th or 27th in a given year. And the reality is that with full-day universal 3K, full-day universal pre-K, making sure there's a high-quality teacher in every classroom, and yes, substantially increasing many of our teachers' wages, and training them better, and building on the partnerships with our community colleges to get trade education back into high school, so that we can retain more of our girls and a lot more of our boys. We can get Maryland back to being first in the country, and we can move Maryland towards even being among the very best in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Manlino. Same question.
So, people may not realize that the governor of the state of Maryland is actually the most powerful gubernatorial office in the country. Our state constitution reserves more powers for our governor than any other governor in the country. That's why we need a governor with the experience with for example, the state budget to get in there and make the progress that we need from day one. I've got the experience with our school system in Montgomery County, with the other school systems. We are ready to move forward with a partnership between the state government, the county government, and the county school system that would provide an immediate influx of $1 billion in facility improvements for our county. And that same model can be used for Prince George's County, and should be, and for Baltimore County, and should be, because it's the same model that we're using in Baltimore City right now. But that's the type of heavy investment that we should put out right now in our local schools, in our older communities, in order to bring back that sense of desirability and stability, and to deal with all of the issues around overcrowding that we experience in so many schools. Like them, I have 2 kids in Montgomery County Public Schools. I have a junior in high school at BCC. They can't play football at that school right now. They can't play any sports at that school right now because they're having an addition put on. That's a great thing. But we need to put that investment in building new schools, in enlarging schools and improving schools. We can do that in the state of Maryland with a governor who wants to get it done. Right now, that's our problem. We have a governor who won't, who doesn't want to get it done, because that's not a fun press release to send out. I will make sure we will make those investments in our young people and in our communities.
Thank you. Ms. Vignaraja?
So to Alex's point about if you want to see where we should be democratic, I think our school system is a perfect example of where the fact that we are talking about air conditioning or heating, or in my father's school in Baltimore City, he taught in the Baltimore City school system for 37 years. They didn't have drinking water. And so when they could afford water coolers, the kids would have water. But the fact that we're talking about hydration suggests that there is something very backwards under this governor. I'm the only candidate in the field who's the product of Maryland Public Schools from kindergarten to 12th grade. My little girl who is up there with my husband is exactly in part why I decided to run. Because the truth is that, when you listen to the Corwin Commission hearings as I was at on Thursday, you realize that there's a lot of big problems out there, and we absolutely have the money. If you want to figure out what entities' priorities are and their values, look at their budget. And so under my leadership, I would make sure that from cradle to career, we were instituting the reforms that are necessary to make sure our kids have a safe and comprehensive education. Everything from universal pre-K to making sure that we're investing in STEM. I went to Woodlawn High School, and it was a high school that doesn't perform very well, but the only reason I was able to go on to good institutions was because there were investments in STEM education. Because I didn't fall in love with molecular biology when I was 17, I fell in love with it when I was 7. And the fact that we are not investing in elementary and middle schools at the rate that we are in high schools reflects that we are not going to be able to compete, not just within Maryland, but with other states and other countries. But it's also that I think there's the little things, like making sure that we're ensuring hot, healthy breakfasts and lunches for our kids, because we need to address this problem in a holistic way. These are our kids, and we have to make sure that they can realize their future.
Thank you. We're now returning to the environment. This question is for Alec Ross and Rashawn Baker. What are your plans for protecting the Chesapeake Bay if federal funding is cut?
We only have one Chesapeake Bay, and it is a unique asset in this state, and this is a case where there has to be great defense and great offense. I mean, first, we should be very grateful to our congressional delegation. After the $73 million for the Chesapeake Bay cleanup was zeroed out in the Trump's proposed budget, Congress, in its wisdom, restored funding. We have to anticipate that year in, year out, we're going to have to play that kind of defense. We can never concede an inch of ground when it comes to federal funding for the Chesapeake Bay. We also have to play defense, I believe, by continuing to negotiate very hard with our regional partners from Delaware, from Virginia, from Pennsylvania. Right now, Larry Hogan is leading the fundraising for the opponent to the governor of Pennsylvania. That doesn't make for a very good basis for negotiations on the Chesapeake Bay. From an offensive standpoint, I do think that we need to follow the blueprint that has been set out by the domain experts on the blueprint for how to fully restore the health of the Chesapeake Bay. This has been a great multi-stakeholder project. It has involved government, it has involved the private sector, it has involved civil society and activist organizations. They have set the path for us. The job of the governor has to be to follow it. The last point that I would make on this, that I think that too many prior administrations, Democrat and Republican, have been indulgent of, is I do think that we've overly indulged the chicken farmers on the Eastern Shore. They get whatever they want, whenever they want. And while I do not want to strangle the industry, I do think that we have to look at long-term environmental stewardship and look at what the trade-offs there are.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you. I think if you look at the difference between the Hogan administration and the O'Malley administration, you would see what we need to do. And that is, you had a strong governor that was committed to protecting the Chesapeake Bay and protecting the environment. An example is that when we moved ahead, for us in Prince George's County, creating a Department of the Environment so that we put the environment on the top tier. We also moved ahead with our stormwater management, our P3 project. While Governor Hogan ran on this so-called rain tax. Everybody was mad about taxing the rain. But when you ask people if they wanted to protect the Chesapeake and Anacostia, they said yes. Well, that's what the runoff was designed to protect. I think we have to be strong not only at the federal level, but at the governor's level. That these are policies we're going to take and push back against the federal level, but also be proactive on our end, working with our regional partners, whether it's Delaware or other places. But at the heart, we in Maryland have to be stronger and more aggressive on protecting it and calling the federal government out and calling Trump out and also calling the governor out.
Thank you. Following the theme of the environment, this is a question for Rich Madalino, Ben Jealous, and Chris Figueroa. What strategies do you think can be used to incentivize the use of renewable energy? Mr. Madalino.
We need to first increase the renewable portfolio standard in the state. The renewable portfolio standard is the term that's used for the percentage of electricity that is used in our state that comes from renewable sources. Right now, in the legislature, we've been able to drive that up to a goal of 25% by the year 2020 over Governor Hogan's veto. We need to keep that going. There's a plan for 50%, there's a plan for 100%, we have to get there. The survival of our state, the survival of potentially humanity is dependent upon us getting the climate change under control as a result of fossil fuels and other pollution that are impacting the global climate. So we need to help businesses start in our state that can actually provide an investment or provide the work and the jobs in clean energy. I don't know if people realize this, but 2 centuries ago, the fossil fuel industry in America started in Baltimore. We need to be where the clean energy revolution and industry starts. You know, when we talked a little bit about economic development on the Eastern Shore, one thing that we could do, for example, when we're putting out the wind power facilities off of Ocean City, which, believe it or not, Congressman Harris is trying to stop with, again, silence from Governor Hogan. You know what? The tenders that were supposed to go out and care for those and service those windmills and turbines were to be built in Salisbury. The turbines were to be built where County Executive Kamenetz was talking about at Sparrows Point. We have the ability to create good jobs, clean energy businesses here through an investment, especially an investment in small businesses, and as we tried to point out, through an investment in small businesses owned by women and minorities.
Thank you. Mr. Jealous?
Well, it's hard to follow Rich on this because we believe basically the same thing. In fact, we were both speaking at the same event on this 3 months ago. We have greater will in our state to move forward faster on clean and renewable energy production than any state in this region. And we need to take a page out of the book of Louisiana after Katrina, when they decided to partner with Northern European companies to become the regional leader in coastal restoration. You see, as Wayne Gretzky said, he was a great hockey player because he skated to where the puck was going. And the puck on energy production is going towards clean and renewable. So our opportunity isn't just to build turbines to deploy off of our shores. No, it's to build turbines to be deployed throughout this region. And that's why we have to get there quickly. And quite frankly, when we do, because about 60% of our clean and renewable energy production will come from wind to this state. When we do, we'll cross the Rubicon from creating good jobs like $15 per hour, putting solar panels on roofs, to creating good union jobs, $50 per hour, building turbines. And that's critical because it shifts the politics. Because right now we've got a lot of folks who are, frankly, economically addicted to big oil and big gas and building pipelines. And you can count on me as governor to be somebody who's never met a new pipeline that he's liked. Stood up against the pipeline Standing Rock, stood up against Keystone, and I will be the governor that ensures that no pipeline comes through Maryland, let alone one that they want to put under the Potomac.
Thank you. Ms. Vignarajah?
Well, I gather you're going to get some violent agreement on this question because I couldn't agree more. And in fact, in the pipelines, the fact that we are talking about these pipelines coming through our aquifers and under our waterways reflects how backwards the conversation has gotten. And I appreciate that this is the question asked as opposed to the sad reality under Governor Hogan, which is that under him we had a veto of the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Because Maryland is in a unique position where we actually consume more energy than we produce. And so by ensuring that we have the production in state, we're making sure that we're creating those jobs and we're keeping them here. And so 2 concrete ways in which I would ensure that we are incentivizing the production to be in state are as follows. One is we need to make sure that we are diversifying the income streams with clean energy systems. And by that, what I mean is putting solar panels on land that is not being used. So in some cases, that's going to be landfills. In some cases, that's going to be incentivizing farmers to put solar panels on land that is not being used. But the reality is that we can make sure that we're increasing our production here in state by allowing for another income stream to be generated by individuals who have land that is not being put to good use. But the second part of it is that with offshore wind, we should be pioneers along the eastern seaboard on this issue. Because we know that it's not just about making sure that we have renewable energy, but it's actually about creating well-paying jobs. Offshore wind jobs, or wind jobs in general, are paying 2 to 3 times more than other jobs related to coal. And so we can create tax incentives to make sure that this is promoted in the state. And that's how I would make sure that we could ensure in Maryland that the creation of more jobs would also be alongside the creation of more energy.
Thank you. We have another transit question, and on a topic that was alluded to earlier. This question is for Kevin Kamenetz or Sharon Baker. Our county executive, Ike Leggett, proposed several years ago adding a tax on gasoline of 10% per gallon to fund the metro and other transit improvements. Do you think this is a viable proposal, or what is your alternative to provide dedicated funding for transit? Mr. Baker.
You know, I did do that, didn't he? I mean, if you think about it, he was forward-thinking. He actually proposed it before we actually passed the gas tax. The idea of the gas tax, which I supported, in Montgomery County and passed in the General Assembly with strong delegation support, was to use around mass transit, including what you see as the metro system in the Washington region, but also the Red Line in Baltimore. And so when we did that, that's what the money was supposed to be used for. What we found out during the Hogan administration is, rather than making the tough economic investment decisions around transit, they took the money and they started spending on highways and bridges out in the eastern shore of western Maryland, which I have lots of highways and bridges in Prince George's County, it's 500 square miles. But the idea was to take that increase in gas tax and use it to invest in our metro system, which also provides job opportunities, which increases our commercial tax base, which goes into the revenues that we can then fix our roads and bridges. So I agree with Ike's proposal, and we actually passed it. So now we need to prioritize that funding. So it goes into the metro system, but also into dealing with a red line in Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. Kamenetz.
Thank you. I actually, once again, agree with County Executive Baker in terms of the gas tax and the origin of that. More importantly, though, I want to talk about the state of affairs of transit in this state. Every world-class city in this world has a public integrated mass transit system. London, New York, Philadelphia, even Washington, D.C. And while there are service and reliability issues, there at least is still a multi-jurisdictional operating system here. Baltimore region, we got screwed, okay? We have 2 independent rail lines that both have terminus in Baltimore County. The Red Line wasn't the greatest panacea, but at least it was a 3rd line. And Governor Hogan, without any studies, and as he is wont to do, just issued a press conference and said, I'm pulling the plug on the Red Line. I am giving back $900 million that was laying there on a shelf from the federal government. And now, in my final act of spite, I am taking the $900 million of state money that was devoted for mass transit solutions in the Baltimore region, and I'm dispersing it for rural road projects. So it's not surprising, of course, because he is the self-avowed 20th century highway king, as opposed to one who focuses on 21st century intermodal opportunities. And that's to get people to work, ease traffic congestion, and create economic opportunities at each of these stops. We need to make sure that we are promoting mass transit opportunities in a comprehensive manner, and not this silly, flashy headline with no details like this $9 billion game that he's just playing. This is the leadership we need from our next governor. Thank you.
Thank you. We've reached our last question before the closing statement, and we're going to be starting with Ben Jealous. The question is, what has Governor Hogan done that you most disagreed with? And if elected, what would you do differently? Or how would you correct it? Mr. Jealous.
You know, the easiest answer would be to say that his investment in vouchers, knowing those millions of dollars, with 80% of them would go to kids already in those private schools, is the thing I most disagree with. And I will end that program when I become governor. But what I most disagree with, what I think we may be missing, is his alignment with Attorney General Sessions in restarting the war on drugs. He talks a good game about the opioid epidemic, but he shifts money towards law enforcement. And now he's come out and called for a return to truth in sentencing, a failed program that's crazy expensive. We need a governor who's do, frankly, what I helped do in states across this country. Pull together folks on the left and the right and get agreement to shrink our prison system. And as we do it, refocus on getting the most violent, dangerous people off the street. I've had two family members shot in Maryland in the last 10 years. And the reality is we need to be investing in programs like Safe Streets that actually get violence interrupters stopping the next shooting. And we also need to make sure that we have a big enough and a good enough homicide unit and special victims units and crime labs. It seems like Baltimore right now, we got a month backlog just to enter in more in some things like second-degree assault. We have bipartisan consensus to end the failed war on drug strategies, to end mass incarceration. States like Georgia and Texas have moved faster than Maryland. I worked as president of the NAACP to build that consensus in those states. And it would be my joy to do it here in our home state. It terrifies me that we have a governor who wants to line up with Jeff Sessions, restart the war on drugs, and terrorize immigrants as he goes along with Jefferson Beauregard said.
Thank you. Mr. Kempnitz? Yes, you are.
Larry Hogan has decimated our education system in the state of Maryland. In his first 2 years, he cut $110 million out of the education budget, and that was money that was going to be used for special ed teachers and ESOL teachers. He has criticized our teachers and dismissed them as union thugs. He is on his mission to privatize our public schools, creating two publicly funded systems, one filled with haves and one filled with have-nots. And importantly, he has politicized the education process so much that respected members of his own school board and his own school construction program have resigned in protest. I will be the fierce advocate for education that this state needs, and that's a track record I have in Baltimore County. We also need a strong advocate for transportation, for job creation, because he's not making anything better. I'm all about real results. That's my track record, and that's what I'll produce as governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Vignarajah?
So I think that the thing that I most disagree with the governor about is his lack of leadership and unwillingness to stand up against the federal government. Because this is a stance that we have seen across the board. And at a time when the president continues to surprise us, and I mean that unfortunately in the most awful way, we have failed to see Governor Hogan stand up and represent all Marylanders. And what we've seen instead is a governor who continues to fake left and move right, while even modern Republican governors like Governor Baker stand up against the administration. And you can see this across the board. You can see it in terms of the economy, where as federal funding is slashed and we worry about federal jobs, we face a situation where if you took out the 250 to 300,000 federal jobs, we would have the worst unemployment rate in the country. And instead of creating an economy that is resilient and diversified, we have a governor who just maintains that we're open for business, but fails to actually support small businesses and ensure that we have an innovative economy that could compare with Massachusetts or California, even though we have the assets to do so. But it's also what we've seen on the environment. The fact that he vetoed the Clean Energy Jobs Act. He didn't stand up when Chesapeake Bay restoration funding was potentially slashed. The fact that he has not joined other states, over a dozen, in terms of signing up for the Paris Treaty and joining the Climate Alliance, shows the lack of leadership. But it also comes down to the education system, because the reality is that we see time and time again how he has been essentially a reverse Robin Hood. We know that the kids who need this help the most are the kids that he has failed. And that's why we need a governor who will actually stand up for those kids who need support to realize their potential.
Thank you. We're going to continue with Mr. Ross.
I came to Maryland 23 years ago to teach 6th grade, room 308 at Booker T. Washington Middle School in West Baltimore. And I fell in love with the teacher across the hall. She was teaching math, I was teaching language arts and social studies. And this brilliant, beautiful woman is not a union thug. And so there's so many things to disagree with Larry Hogan about, but first and foremost, it really does come down to public education. Maryland has actually, if you think about it, Maryland's actually never had an education governor. A governor who said, my number one priority, my number one or number two priorities is to be an education governor. Never happened. That's why I'm running. We have a once every 15-year opportunity with the Kirwan Commission to reset how we finance education and the education policies behind it. That's why I'm running. It's a once every 15-year opportunity. And if Larry Hogan is reelected, he is going to continue the Betsy DeVosization of education in this state. And if we win, and if a Democrat wins, we're gonna take a great step forward. So I really believe that Larry Hogan has all the wrong instincts on education. And while no one thing is entirely deterministic about what a young person's future looks like, the number one thing that is most deterministic is education. You get a really good education, you're going to most likely have some future well-being. You get a terrible education and you're out of luck. And this caste system that's created with vouchers and the privatization of education and public dollars is wrong, and it needs to be stopped, and I will stop it when I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
You know, John F. Kennedy once quoting, I think, the Greeks, happiness defined as full use of your power along lines of excellence. The problem I have with Governor Hogan is most of his policies, but more importantly, that everything he does is based on politics, based on keeping his poll numbers high. So therefore, he's the first governor in almost 60 years that doesn't propose or oppose legislation in Annapolis. He's the first governor that doesn't let his cabinet officials testify in Annapolis. Every decision he makes is based on a poll. He has not staffed the inner workings of the government to make sure it's efficient. So on the surface, you feel like you're full, but in fact, you're still hungry. He's destroying our government by doing nothing. That is the reason that I'm running. Because as an executive, nothing ticks you off more than seeing someone with this tremendous amount of power, not using it to change the lives of the people you ran for. Why did you run for governor if you didn't plan to do anything? To get somebody to drive you around? Think about it. That is why we're failing. Because we're doing nothing, and he takes the easy answer, whether it's moving a school date that everybody says is 80% popularity to start the schools after Labor Day. But he doesn't dig down deep and to find out whether, in fact, that helps the education of the children. You're for business, but you don't do anything to create businesses. It is the nothing that makes me mad about this governor. Because once he leaves, we will not be better off. We will be behind. Full use of your power along lines of excellence. That's happiness. That's also what a powerful governor is supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Madaleno?
So, if I might have one policy objection and one, I think, style problem that I have with the governor. First, from a policy perspective, the one thing that I find most disappointing is that for many people in the state, Larry Hogan earned their respect and admiration for how he handled his own bout with cancer. And he did it in a very admirable way. And yet this past year, when we passed a bill to give people the opportunity to earn 5 days of leave to care for themselves or their families, he vetoed that. Let me tell you, he had unlimited sick leave. He had people bringing his work to him while he lived in public housing. That lack of empathy for other people fighting the same type of illness that he had, to me, is very distressing and disappointing. On a style standpoint, the governor once said, I won because I made people angry, and I'm going to win re-election as I keep them angry. And that's not the way to govern. We need a governor who's going to be optimistic. We need a governor who's going to bring people together, like I have, on a variety of battles, on a variety of issues that I'm sure Jamie Raskin will tell you, that people said they were impossible to bring to make progress on. But we brought people together and we got it done. I want to return a sense of optimism to our state. I don't want to divide people, right? A nation, a house divided will not stand. We need to bring people together and restore a sense of optimism and hope for the future. And that will never be Larry Hogan or a Republican governor, quite frankly.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to be inviting each candidate to make a 2-minute closing statement. We're going to start with Krish Vignaraja and then come back to Alec Roscoe down the table. Ms. Vignaraja?
Thank you all for sitting through this. It really has been a pleasure. I think my pitch would be that if you elect me, you'll get a twofer. Alec mentioned that Maryland hasn't truly had an education governor before. Maryland also has never had a female governor before. And so to this question about how do we improve diversity in politics, my answer is elect me. But I say twofer because you would also have a governor who puts education first and foremost, because I do think it is the most important issue that is at stake. Because before I was anything, I was never the product of politics or privilege. I was the product of public school teachers. I was the product of our Maryland public school system. And I realized that we need to implement a series of policies that are comprehensive, from cradle to career, from universal pre-K to making sure that we're guaranteeing free community college, to making sure that we're guaranteeing workforce training, ensuring that every single Marylander who wants to get a job is educated and trained for it. But it's also other issues. It's about working families. It's about making sure that Maryland is the first state in the nation that guarantees 3 months of paid family leave. It's about making sure that Maryland has an economy that's resilient and diversified. We've talked about many of the issues. But I in particular would make sure that Maryland has an innovative economy that competes with the Valley. That Maryland is a state that invests in infrastructure. Everything from guaranteeing universal broadband across the state, making sure that we don't leave rural communities out, to making sure that we have a public transit system and roads that ensure that in 2017 we can be productive citizens. But also making sure that we are, ensuring smart growth, that we're actually growing areas like New Carrollton, but also the environment. And for all those reasons, I hope I have your support.
Well, thank you for having me this afternoon. I think we need some new faces and some new ideas in the Democratic Party, and I'm glad to be one of them. I'm not entirely new to politics. I ran technology policy for Barack Obama's presidential campaign. Not entirely new to government. For 4 years, I ran very large programs inside the State Department that oftentimes had thousands of employees and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of budget. But I did take up the challenge that my two old bosses, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, issued, which was, hey, it's time for a new generation of Democrats to get on the ballot, to get into these races, and to win. And I want to make 4 promises to you, 4 things for you to expect to hear from me over the course of this race. Number 1, you're not going to get tweet-sized public policy from me. I'm a policy wonk, I admit it. I wrote a New York Times bestseller called The Industries of the Future. I cannot help but think not just about, what sounds good as a tweet, but what the actual governance behind it is. Hillary teased me in, I think, a nice way, saying I was bitten. I've got the responsibility gene. Number 2, I am running to be the education governor that Maryland has never had. Number 3, I'm running in all 24 jurisdictions. Democrats have taken the wrong lessons from analytics. We cannot just campaign in the same old places. We need to go back to doing the good old-fashioned work of persuasion. I put myself through college in part by working as a midnight janitor and on a beer truck. These are the kinds of folks who have stopped voting for Democrats. I'm going to work hard to get them back. And then the last thing you can expect from me is to run with respect and ferocity. I'm going to beat Larry Hogan. And I'm going to beat Larry Hogan with your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to us today and having us out here. At a time when I think we need it the most, I'm the one candidate up here that's passed laws at the legislative level as a legislator, but also run the 2nd largest jurisdiction in the state of Maryland. When I became county executive, Prince George's County was down. We were rocked by the biggest ethical scandal that we've seen in the state of Maryland. We were leading the state in foreclosures, crime was rising, and we lacked economic development anywhere. 7 years later, Prince George's County is #1 in job creations in the state. It's #1 in rising home values. Our crime is down to 30-year lows, and we've got $8 billion worth of development that's happening everywhere across the county. Are we perfect? No. Are we better? Absolutely. Whether you live in the rural, urban, or suburban part of our great state, I've got a record of results on issues that matter to you. If you remember just one thing from this, education, healthcare, creating job opportunities is not just a political issue for me. I've seen firsthand as a caregiver for my wife why we need great healthcare for you. I've seen firsthand how our Transforming Neighborhoods initiatives have turned people's lives around in Prince George's County. I'm running for governor because I don't believe you lead by doing only what is easy. You govern by making the tough choices to make everybody's life better. I hope to earn your support. I want you to know you already have mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Madalena.
Thank you all very much for attending today and listening to us. Thank you again to United for Maryland for doing this. Thank you to my family for sitting through yet another one of these. When we were starting this campaign, my daughter was being interviewed. Remember, she's a freshman in high school, and she was asked, "Are you excited about your dad running for governor?" And her reply was, "I'm really excited because he loves to talk to people, especially about politics, and now he's got a lot more people to talk to other than me." So, and you are those others today, so I greatly appreciate you spending that time trying to make this very important decision, because as the name of your organization says, United for Maryland, we need to be united in Maryland. Our country, our community faces a series of problems that we have not faced before. Many of us are grappling with issues that we never thought we would address or fight or deal with or think about occurring in the United States or in Maryland. We need a governor who is going to seek to unite Maryland to move us forward. You know, Maryland was formed as a beacon for hope in the 1600s. It was a radical proposition for the time that people of different faiths could live together in peace. We have been a sanctuary for people seeking justice, hope, security for centuries. We have been a beacon for the rest of the country and the rest of the world. We cannot let that go away. I will not be that governor. I have stood many times and helped transform battles where people said it was impossible for us to ever win, and we've made them inevitable in Maryland. I want to do that again in Maryland and help make us the shining beacon that we need to be for our country now and into the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
You know, in one generation, my family went from raising my mom in the McCullough Homes housing projects in West Baltimore to sending me off to Oxford as a road scholar. That was possible because our state was a place where our economy was growing so robustly. It wasn't just creating good new jobs, it was creating good new union jobs and lifting thousands of families like mine out of poverty. A place where mass incarceration didn't exist and our public universities were extremely affordable. A place where our public schools were among the best in the country and getting better all the time, the way that they leapt forward when my mom joined up with a group of black girls and sued Western High School in Baltimore. She was 12 years old, so she could desegregate it when she was 15. And the reality is that I'm running for governor because I believe we can get back to the future, back to a place where we're doing big things again, back to a place where Maryland is a place that all of our families moved to or stayed in because it's a better place to move forward than any other. Some folks will tell you that my dreams are too big. I've been hearing that my whole life. And frankly, everything I've achieved in politics, I've achieved the same way. I've built a movement. I built a coalition bigger than anybody thought was possible. And so I'm here today not to just invite you to join a campaign, but to join a movement. I'm not a career politician, I'm an organizer. I'm a business leader. And the reality is that I know that we can build a Maryland for all of our children that allows all of them to pursue their highest dreams without fear of death or fear that they won't be able to provide health care for their families. We can move beyond fear. We can get back to our dreams, and we need to build a movement to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cummings, you have the last word.
Now let me think. First of all, let me thank my colleagues up on the stage. I've just never been prouder to be a Democrat. So you've heard, I'm Kevin Kamenetz. I'm the Baltimore County Executive. I'm a lifelong Marylander, and I'm a lifelong Democrat. What you may not know is that I'm actually the youngest of 5 kids. Dad was a pharmacist and had this little corner drugstore. All 5 kids had to work the drugstore, but I think much to my father's sadness, not one of us became pharmacists. But in that drugstore, we learned the value of hard work, the importance of honesty, integrity, what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. Someone couldn't pay a prescription, Dad would say, okay, just pay me when you can. I worked in that store from the moment I was tall enough to reach the cash register until the day I started my first job as a prosecutor. And those values help shape who I am. It's why earlier this year I signed an executive order that states that no Baltimore County employee, including the police, can discriminate based upon one's immigration status, and that our jail will not hold someone past their mandatory release date absent the existence of a court order. But it's also why last year I wrote to the presidents of all 5 colleges in Baltimore County and told them that no county police officer will interfere with a DACA student. It's why 2 years ago I changed the name in Baltimore County of Robert E. Lee Park to Lake Roland. And it's why 6 years ago I pass a law and sign into law a bill that stops discrimination against transgender rights. I will tell you one thing, Jill and I are raising our kids here, our 2 teenage sons. This is our state, and we want a better state for our children. I can promise you that, one promise, I will be the hardest working governor this state has seen. Thank you.
Thank you. And that closes off the question portion of our Rich Madaleno asked me to be a nice moderator. I hope I accomplished that. I thank United for Maryland for inviting me to moderate and all its volunteers making this forum a success. And before I turn it over to Congressman Raskin, everyone please take a seat. We are going to be excusing our candidates. They've had been logged 2 hours of questions, so they need a break and to head over to their meet and greet stations. And I'd like to remind you all to complete your post